I'd like to talk with you about creating a timeline for your church planting project. This is sort of where the rubber meets the road in your work. Now, I'm going to give you an example here. This is my timeline from over 30 years ago, actually 31 years ago, more than 31 years ago, when we started working on our first church plant, Shore Life Church in Huntington Beach. That church, I've said before, I think in this training, has just turned 30 years old. And in this particular timeline, we started working on it about 18 months before our launch. And we did the timeline into the first year or two of the church. Now, 28 years beyond that first 2 years have transpired, and the church has been on a good course. But I want to tell you that this timeline exercise was so very helpful to me. I learned it through my coaches and mentors in church planting, and I've since passed this on to many other church planters. This is where you take a lot of the work that you've already done in the planning and you put it all together, and you put it in such a way that you know where you're going, and also your team can know where they're going. So I'm going to take you through just briefly, because we're on video here, the steps involved in that. Also, this is our booklet that we put together for our second church plant here in the Temecula Valley. And I realized that my capture is doing just like a straight mirror reflection, so this looks backwards to you, but that's okay. But the plan here, and the formatting is rather old. I get it. Times have changed, looks have changed, but what's in here is very much relevant. Introduction: who are the planters? Why start new churches? How does the church get started? Who will you reach? What's your vision? What are your values? All the stuff we do and prepare to plant winds up in here. And at the very end of this was our timeline and our budget. And I used this document to bring team members on board, and also supporting churches and other supporters so they would know what was going to happen. This exercise is so very important. So I'll just quickly walk you through it, okay? It's in the Prepare to Plant manual, so you'll find it there as well. But I'll just take you through the main points here real quick. You're asking a few different questions. The first question is, what is the purpose? And we've talked about that through vision and mission. Secondly, how will this be accomplished? And we've talked about strategy and structure. Who will do what? We've talked about team. We've also talked about who you're going to reach, and we've called that target. And then the other question, the last question that we're going to deal with here is, when will all of this happen? Now, on our timelines, I should say, we took from James, where James says, if the Lord wills, we will do this or that or go to such and such city. So every timeline, every planning document, you really need to have the if the Lord wills piece in there. I used to write it right on our plans that I'd give to our team. I'd say, this is our best effort to try to pray and then plan, but we're going to do as God decides. If the Lord wills, then we'll go in this direction. If he changes direction, then we're going to change with him. Just keep that in mind. So you've got those questions in mind, and so you're going to start putting your timeline together. When is it going to happen? Developing your strategic timeline. As Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. Think about where you're going and what that's going to look like. And then I ask you in this exercise to think through the fully functioning church. Whatever your methodology is, whether you're a house church or online, or whether you do the traditional methods of a launch, and maybe you have some preview services if you go that route, whatever it is, do the best that you can to picture what that's going to look like, and prayerfully do so, and see if God doesn't give you some clarity on what this thing needs to look like, so you know the direction you need to go in. Now, it's always going to change. God's going to do what he wants to do, and it's never going to look exactly like what you envision, but we need to plan and pray and move in a certain direction, and this helps us do that. Thirdly, you want to make categories. What are the ministries that you envision? What are your services going to look like? How's that going to work? Is it going to be in a building, a rented place, online? What are going to be the components? What's teaching look like? What does discipleship look like for your church? What does mission and outreach look like for your church? So you want to have, as we said here, 6 to 8 broad categories of what your church is going to be doing. It's best if you put those by the purpose of the church. Like some will say now, maybe their purpose is worship, community and mission. That's what Brian Sanders says for micro churches, but there's all kinds of ways you can frame this. But have that at the top with the general ministries that you're going to have as a church. Okay? Write them all down like it says on a large piece of paper. If you just want to go old school, like I did here, that can be really helpful just to lay out all the categories and be able to think it through. We have also, when we have times with teams, we'll invite them to write on Post-it notes all the various ministries that you think you would have. So you take your Post-it note on your piece of paper that's all spread out here, write down, what you envision for a certain ministry, and then just start putting them all down. And eventually you're going to put all these together in an orderly way, and you're going to put them according to time frame to have your timeline start to take shape. On the left side, write down the weeks or the months or however detailed you want to do that, but put all of those down all the way to the bottom of when you anticipate the church functioning or launching or whatever it might be. Now that you have this, the things you're going to be doing, the broad categories, and you have down the side the time frame, then you're going to start putting in the Post-it notes or your notes about what needs to happen when it needs to happen. And again, this will change over time, but it really gives you a grid on which to work. Now, you might find at the very beginning of a plant that the first things you need to do, or maybe it's largely administrative. Maybe you need to get your bank accounts in order, and you need to get a bunch of legal stuff done. So in one of your categories, you might have administration, and you find that in the very first weeks of the church plant, all you have is a bunch of administrative stuff and nothing else over here. Well, that's okay, but it lets you know you need to do this first sequentially before you can get to these other things. So however it works for you, this is very helpful. Otherwise, we're tempted to just kind of work at everything at the same time, but when you can see your process, it lets you know, okay, I have to work on these things first. I have to have things in place, like, for example, for me, it was getting these documents together because our second plant was a parachute drop. And so before I started recruiting team or trying to get churches to come on board, I needed to be able to explain to them what we were doing. So I had to work on this kind of stuff first. For the first month even of our plant was really about getting things in order before I could start casting the vision for it. And then finally, once you have all this down, start working backward from whatever your goal is. A book now out of print was hugely helpful to me. It's called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, and it's the entrepreneurial myth. And now I think he calls it the E-Myth Revisited. And if you Google that, you can find a PDF document. But in that great book written in the 80s, Michael Gerber will say, he's talking about, again, entrepreneurs and business, but he says you need to work on your business before you work in your business. And I think that applies to church planting as well. We need to work on the church before we start doing all the stuff within the church. So check out that book. Go find it if you can. It's a really helpful tool, and it'll also help you with this timeline kind of stuff. And then again, put everything in sequential order according to time. And when you get done, hopefully you'll have a rough document that you can use to keep you moving forward. So, the right point in time, putting the what and when together. And here's an exercise we'd like you to consider. You might just take a break when this is done and start working on your timeline on your own. Put your target goals at the bottom of the worksheet. Write in the main categories of activities. Number 2, fill in the time on the side, months and weeks. And then start putting in the activities as you go. And it should look something like that. Make sense? So work on the timeline, and I think you'll find that it will be a really helpful tool for you.